Well, if you include NHI and you abolish medical aids and have it transferred into a fund, there's no ways we'd be able to support a budget like that, because it's not a real budget. The billions of rands that NHI is expected to cost will blow out the budget massively. I'm very concerned about it. I'm very concerned about the signalling and what this may mean for broader agreements like AGOA further down the line. I'm concerned as well because PEPFAR funding and funding from that is a large cornerstone of the funding for our HIV/AIDS response in South Africa, which is another reason why we perhaps should be very cautious about how we proceed with NHI, because there might be... Yes, we will be proposing mechanisms. It's very clear that there does need to be a far more high-level engagement that happens between the leaders of parties more regularly. If one looks at the coalition in Great Britain that existed, they had what was called a quad, where the two leaders and two others from each of their parties would attend and thrash out issues before they went to cabinet. So I definitely do think there's scope for more engagement between the leaders of the political parties. The clearinghouse mechanism that exists does not have terms of reference. And the clearinghouse mechanism itself cannot be a substitute for the statement of intent, where clause 19.3 is very, very clear that that there has to be sufficient consensus. Sufficient consensus is clearly defined within that statement of intent. And again, this was a document that was signed freely, willingly, and with open eyes by all parties to the Government of National Unity. And it wasn't something that was inserted later. It was there in black and white at the beginning of the process. And the statement of intent is the foundation upon which the GNU is built. And you cannot go back and start reneging on those key commitments that were made in that initial process. Lizeka, our relationship with the Freedom Front is very good. I reached out to Dr. Peter Groenewald yesterday. They are obviously conducting their own internal processes, which I'll leave them to explain or elaborate on. But we remain committed to working with the Freedom Front to provide good, clean, accountable governance wherever we can work together. It's been unfortunate that there seems to have been a localized dynamic in the Western Cape, and I think there are a variety of reasons for that. However, we look forward to finalizing the stabilization pact that we've been pushing backwards and forwards between each other for the last 2 months. We've now got the Western Cape's views and opinions on it, and we'll obviously look to move towards concluding that stabilization pact. In terms of the funding, I'm very concerned about it. I'm very concerned about the signalling and what this may mean for broader agreements like AGOA further down the line, which we know is supposed to be finalized in September of this year. I'm concerned as well because PEPFAR funding and funding from that is a large cornerstone of the funding for our HIV/AIDS response in South Africa, which is another reason why we perhaps should be very cautious about how we proceed with NHI, because there might be a new budget item that we're going to have to provide for, which would be to fill that gap that will be left by PEPFAR and that funding that's been frozen over the time. And I think it's another reason why we should proceed with caution, with just simply trashing the healthcare sector over an ideological desire rather than something that's based on costed, evidence-based decision-making. Lunga, we don't feel trapped. We went into the coalition with our eyes wide open. We knew exactly what the risks were, but equally we knew exactly what the risks were for us not to go into the coalition. And I certainly think that the benefits that we've seen for South Africa, both internationally and at home, have been significant and are certainly moving in the right direction. Of course, in any coalition, no party can get everything that they want. The DA understands that. We've accepted there are going to be areas where we need to compromise, where we need to retrim our sails. That's a natural flow of what happens in coalitions. That's why most parties like to get a majority, because you don't then have to temper what you want to do by the views and opinions of other parties. But the people of South Africa chose not to give any party a majority, and we must work together. And so, yes, we are prepared to compromise, but we will not compromise on matters that trash the Constitution and on matters that will crash the economy. We went into this coalition with our eyes wide open. And it was for that reason that Minister McPherson addressed his letter to the President last year, midway through, I think it was in the opening few months of the coalition, saying to the President, I know this bill is on your desk. However, these are the concerns that I would have if I had to implement it. And attached to that was an opinion which the department had received from senior counsel, pointing out the very obvious flaws in the bill, including the constitutionality of the contradictory clauses. Now, ministers, when they're sworn into office, don't swear allegiance to the President. They swear allegiance to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and swear to uphold the Constitution and all other law of the Republic. Now, when something is patently unconstitutional, and when something is patently incorrect, and the minister who would be responsible for implementing that points this out and just simply gets a no, with no guidance or explanation as to what the correct way to proceed would be, and that the leaders of the parties then, without any consultation, find out about this on social media. That's not how coalitions work. And I think it's been badly handled. And I think that that's why there needs to be a meeting with the senior leaders of the coalition, and why I've sought a meeting with Mr. Ramaphosa directly. And yes, there are ideological differences between the DA and the ANC. In fact, there are broad ideological differences between the 10 parties to the GNU. But so too are there broad ideological differences in coalitions around the world. Broad ideological differences between the SPD and the FDP in Germany. Broad ideological differences between the Lib Dems in Britain and the Conservative Party. All over the world. There's a whole view about coalitions and made up of different parties. And there are different parties because different parties have different ideas and they attract different types of voters. But ideological differences shouldn't be a gulf when you're coming together around a common set of objectives. And so, yes, the ANC have their views, we have ours, but surely we can agree that economic growth and jobs are the primary focus of this country. Because without economic growth and jobs, we're not going to be able to lift people out of poverty. We're not going to end hunger. We're not going to create better opportunities for more people. We're not going to have a government that's able to spend more on social infrastructure. Because without that economic growth, we're going to continue the way we've been for the last 20 years, where our country just slides further and further into debt and closer to a fiscal cliff. So in a country that is in a deep crisis like South Africa, we can agree on the big things that need to be done to get the economy moving. And that's why I've said we entered the government to grow the economy and to create jobs. And everything that we do as a government should surely be looked at through the lens of creating jobs, growing the economy and ending poverty. And we should discard everything that does not speak to those key priorities. And that when issues that threaten the economic stability of the country, like an entirely uncosted, untested, untried NHI, it poses a significant risk to the balance sheet of South Africa, poses a significant risk to the social stability of the country, and it poses a huge risk to the sustainability of healthcare in the country. But we all agree that we need universal access to basic healthcare for all South Africans, regardless of their income or geography. And surely we can work together to fixing that. So let's start by fixing the public healthcare system. Let's focus on public-private partnerships like we've done with Operation Vulindlela. Let's rather start with the suggestions made by the private hospital groups, by the practitioners, all of whom have signed a big red warning line. There's a problem here. How does it make economic sense to proceed with something when there's such vehement opposition from the very people who you're going to expect to implement it? How do you proceed with something honestly in a budget where it's completely uncosted and where even the most conservative estimates place it way beyond the reach of what we're able to afford in the current fiscal envelope? But that doesn't mean we can't start doing what we've already done in the Western Cape. Let's focus on improving treatment of people at hospitals, public healthcare facilities. Focus on improving the experience of people with the interface with the public healthcare system. Employing more nurses and doctors. Making sure we improve standards there. Those are the things that we can all agree in the medium-term development plan need to be done. And I don't think that anyone could disagree with that. So in a coalition where there are ideological differences, you focus on the things that you can get right. And let me be very clear. We're not here to implement the national democratic revolution. That's the ANC's ideology. It's not the ideology of the Government of National Unity. There are 9 other parties in that GNU, and they all have their own views and opinions. And we're not there to implement the NDR. We're there to promote growth and jobs. And that's our focus there. Amanda, the meeting is taking place later this evening. I'm obviously waiting finalization from the President's office. It's scheduled to take place then at least. Burial's question, sorry.
Will the GNU last?
Yeah, I think the GNU will last if there's a genuine commitment by the parties to be proper stewards and good coalition partners. So I said very clearly, we are committed to the GNU. We regard it as South Africa's most precious asset at the moment, given what we are seeing, the effect of it on economic growth and jobs already. And it's not something we've entered lightly, and it's certainly not something we'll exit lightly. But the moment we're unable to promote jobs and economic growth, and that we're treated as bystanders in a government which we bring a large share of the votes to, it will obviously have to reconsider. So I believe it can last. I believe it must last. I think the alternatives are too ghastly to contemplate. But it requires then a maturity. Sorry. It requires a level of maturity and partnership that to date has not been displayed. And I think if we're going to make this thing last in the interests of South Africa, which I think it behoves us to do, then I think we need to move into a new reset era where there is greater consensus on decision making. And it applies on everything. South Africa's international relations stance. This is not an ANC government anymore. There are other parties with different views and opinions. And we must have those discussions. How do we get the economy growing? Yes, you've got different views and opinions, but how do we focus on the levers of growth and job creation? And let's focus like a laser beam on those things. There are so many challenges facing our country after 20 years of absolute flat economic growth and our country heading in the wrong direction. There's lots to overcome. And we're not going to be able to do everything in the first 5 years. We must accept that. But surely we can focus on growth and jobs and start to turn the needle so that by the time 2029 rolls around, we'll have something concrete to show South Africans. An economy that's more inclusive and growing, more people in work, more children with greater opportunities when they leave school, better public service that processes and treats people like customers, making sure that we've got access to cheap internet so that more entrepreneurs can start up, making sure our basic education system is working, making sure that there's justice for small fisher folk in small towns around South Africa, making sure we build the rural economy, making sure we're able to move people out of subsistence farming into family farming and commercial farming. If we can show South Africans those things by 2029, I think we'd be able to look back with pride at this time and see these difficulties that we had, but know in the end it was worth it. But that can only come if there's a reset in the relations in the GNU and that we're treated as partners, not as bystanders. Thank you very much. Oh, the budget. Well, if you include NHI and you abolish medical aids and have it transferred into a fund, there's no ways we'd be able to support a budget like that because it's not a real budget. The billions of rands that NHI is expected to cost you will blow out the budget massively. So in the medium-term development plan, I think what the focus should be on is how we focus on fixing primary healthcare and public healthcare facilities. And we pour money and effort and resources into that. Once we've done that, we can come back and have a debate around medical aids and medical tax credits at a later stage. But my worry is that you're going to crash the entire system and it will be a catastrophic economic blow for South Africa as well. Thanks.